This game has been dead for so long it feels like I'm grave robbing just by talking about it. Today we're talking about Beyond the Wire. Why? Because 10 of you absolute degenerates voted on it, and Beyond the Wire won. Which brings us here, talking about a game that is very dead. And I don't mean low player count dead, I mean I couldn't even record gameplay dead. I booted up the game and found exactly one other human being online. At that point, it stops becoming an FPS and starts being a support group. Now, before I start ranting about the game, let's cover what the game actually is and what it is trying to be. Beyond the Wire is a 50v50 multiplayer FPS set during World War I. It's built on the Squad framework, developed by Redstone Interactive and published by Offworld Industries. If you've played Squad, or Squad 44, you already understand the design philosophy. Large-scale battles, realism, heavy emphasis on teamwork and communication. Beyond the Wire applied that same formula to trench warfare with brutal combat, period-accurate weapons, and a focus on coordinated pushes rather than lone wolf gameplay. It's a pretty solid idea. It's worked for modern conflicts, World War II, why not World War I? So they gave it a shot. The game launched into early access in October 2020, peaking around 1,700 concurrent players. Initial reception was mostly positive, but there's always a few issues with network issues and latency to start, but that got buffered out. But overall, people enjoyed the atmosphere. They said the combat was brutal and felt authentic, and World War I really isn't a setting that you see all that often. But that player count did not last very long. Within a short time, the population dropped to around 400 concurrent players, and it never really recovered. Beyond the Wire stayed in early access for about 2 years. During that time, the developers were actually pretty consistent with regular updates, patches, and new content. In March 2022, Offworld Industries acquired Redstone Interactive, and the game moved towards full release in August of 22. And that's where things really started to fall apart. After full release, the player base dropped to around 100 players, and then slowly, quietly faded away. From everything I can find, development itself wasn't a disaster. There was no massive public drama, no catastrophic launch meltdowns, no horrendous updates, which makes what happened to the game all that more confusing. Real quick though, if you're enjoying these What Happened to deep dives, consider subscribing. This channel is basically a graveyard tour of multiplayer games at this point. Now, the big issue I have with Beyond the Wire isn't that the player base is gone. Games die all the time and it happens. It's that the game is still being sold. Yes, I know it's $10, but it's still being sold for money when the devs aren't even supporting it themselves. There's no official servers. There hasn't been an update in years. And the game is designed around 50v50 matches. And the player base is gone. If I'm paying money for a large-scale multiplayer shooter that literally cannot function as intended, why is it still on sale? As far as I can see it, Offworld has two reasonable options. They can make Beyond the Wire free to play, or they can just yank it from the store. A perfect comparison that I can think of for this is Black Wake, a game that went free to play once the population declined because selling an empty multiplayer game just isn't right. So why did players actually leave? Because here's the thing, Beyond the Wire isn't a bad game. From what I remember playing it when it first came out, it was solid, atmospheric, combat was brutal and realistic, and I enjoyed pushing across no man's land and dying to artillery. The problem, I think, is the time period in the gameplay loop. When most people load into a 50v50 shooter, they want to push objectives, flank the enemy, and make aggressive plays. World War I warfare doesn't really support that. Trench combat means you're waiting or holding a position where you're dying instantly to artillery or a machine gun. Now, while that's historically accurate, it's not always fun in a large-scale multiplayer FPS. Other World War I games figured this out and figured ways around it to make it more entertaining. Games like Verdun, Tannenberg, and Isonzo leaned more into the arcade while still capturing the feel of the era. Beyond the Wire stayed fully committed to realism, and that limited its long-term appeal, in my opinion. Beyond the Wire didn't fail because it was broken. It failed because it was too niche in a genre that already struggles to keep player populations alive. It was a realistic World War I shooter built on a framework designed for modern combined arms combat, and that mismatch slowly bled the player base dry. At this point, Beyond the Wire exists as a cautionary tale for future devs that realism and atmosphere are not enough, and multiplayer games live or die by their communities. So the real question isn't what happened to Beyond the Wire, it's whether the publishers are willing to admit when a multiplayer game has reached the end of the line. Now, if you want to decide what game we dig up next, check the community tab. That's where the next polls are going live.